Commander Hyon stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the last city on Korthax burn. The planet had been home to over 3 billion beings just 6 hours ago. Now it was nothing but ash and molten rock. He felt no emotion as he watched. The flames dance across what used to be a thriving world. This was just another Tuesday for the Veltar Dominion. The Veltar were the galaxy's ultimate predators. They stood 8 feet tall, with thick natural armor covering their bodies like living tanks. Their 4 arms moved with deadly speed, and their reflexes were so fast that most other species couldn't even see them attack. They had conquered over 2,000 star systems in the last 3,000 years, and they had never lost a single battle. Hyon turned away from the burning planet and walked across the bridge. His crew worked quietly at their stations, preparing for the jump to their next target. They were all veterans of hundreds of battles, and they moved with the calm confidence of beings who had never known defeat. Fear was not a word in their language because they had never needed it. "Commander," called out Scout Captain Do Yun from his station, "we have detected something unusual." Hyon walked over to examine the data on Do Yun's screen. The young officer had been with the fleet for only 50 years, which made him practically a child by Veltar standards. But he was good at his job, and he rarely brought anything to Hyon's attention unless it was important. "What is it?" Hyon asked. "Long-range sensors have picked up signals from a system about 40 light-years from here. The signals appear to be coming from the 3rd planet in the system. They look like communications broadcasts." Hyon studied the data. The signals were weak and primitive, nothing like the advanced communications used by the more developed species in the galaxy. "What kind of civilization sends signals like these?" "Based on the technology level, I would estimate they are barely past their industrial age," Do Yun replied. "The planet appears to be populated by a species that calls themselves humans. They seem to be using radio waves for communication and entertainment." Hyon nodded slowly. Another primitive species to add to their collection. The Veltar had conquered thousands of them over the centuries. Some tried to fight back with their crude weapons, but they never lasted more than a few hours against Veltar technology. Others surrendered immediately, which was actually more disappointing. Hyon preferred it when they showed some spirit, even if it was hopeless. "How many of them are there?" he asked. "Approximately 7 billion on the main planet, with small colonies on some of the other worlds in the system," Do Yun answered. 7 billion was a decent number. They would make good workers in the Veltar mining operations, assuming any survived. The initial conquest. The Veltar usually kept about 10% of a conquered population alive for labor purposes. The rest were eliminated to prevent future rebellions. "Set course for the system," Hyon ordered. "Alert Fleet Admiral Moran that we have found our next target." The bridge crew began preparations for hyperspace jump. Hyon returned to his command chair and activated the communication system to address his fleet. He commanded 47 ships, including 12 heavy cruisers and 1 dreadnought. It was more than enough firepower to sterilize an entire star system if necessary. "Warriors of the 47th Conquest Fleet," his voice echoed through every ship in the formation. "We have discovered another world of inferior beings who dare to exist without Veltar permission. In 3 days, we will arrive at their system and offer them the choice that all species receive: submit to the Dominion or be destroyed. Based on their primitive technology, I expect this campaign to last no more than 6 hours." A chorus of approving growls came through the communication system. His warriors were hungry for battle. It had been almost a month since the Korthax campaign, and they were eager to test their weapons again. The Veltar lived for war, and peace made them restless. Hyun closed the communication channel and leaned back in his chair. He had been leading conquest fleets for over 200 years, and the routine never changed. They would drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, demand surrender, and then proceed to demonstrate why resistance was futile. Usually, the target species would surrender after seeing what Veltar weapons could do to their military forces. If they didn't surrender, the fleet would simply destroy everything and move on to the next target. The humans would be no different. Their radio signals suggested they were even more primitive than most species the Veltar encountered. They probably didn't even have spaceflight capabilities beyond their own solar system. It would be like hunting prey that couldn't run away. "Commander," Tactical Officer Jihoon spoke up from his station. "I have completed the initial analysis of the human communications." "What have you learned?" Hyun asked. "It appears that this species has an unusual characteristic," Jihoon said, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "Based on their news broadcasts and entertainment media, they seem to be engaged in constant warfare with each other." Hyun raised one of his 4 eyebrows. "Warfare? With their own kind?" "Yes, sir. Their planet appears to be divided into numerous smaller territories, and these territories are frequently in conflict with each other. Some of these conflicts have been ongoing for decades or even centuries." This was interesting. Most species the Veltar conquered had achieved some level of planetary unity before developing space travel. Internal warfare usually prevented a species from advancing beyond primitive technology levels. Yet these humans had somehow managed to develop radio communications while still fighting among themselves. "Are these conflicts serious, or just minor disputes?" Hyun asked. Jihoon consulted his data again. Based on their own historical records, they have engaged in something they call world wars that involved most of their population. The most recent of these conflicts resulted in over 50 million deaths. Hyun was surprised. 50 million deaths was a significant number, even by Veltar standards. Most species couldn't sustain that level of casualties and continue to function as a civilization. Yet these humans seem to have recovered and continued their technological development. "Interesting," he said. "Perhaps they will provide more entertainment than usual." The 3-day journey to the human system passed quickly. Hyun spent the time reviewing tactical data and preparing his forces for what he expected to be a routine conquest. The humans had no space-based defenses that his scouts could detect, and their weapons technology appeared to be limited to chemical explosives and simple projectile weapons. It would be like using a hammer to crush insects. When the fleet finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system, Hyun was impressed by the sight of their star. It was a stable yellow star with 9 planets, similar to many other systems in the galaxy. The 3rd planet showed clear signs of life, with blue oceans and green continents visible from space. "Begin standard scanning procedures," he ordered. "I want a complete analysis of their defensive capabilities before we proceed." The scanning revealed exactly what he had expected. The humans had no significant space-based military forces, just a few primitive satellites and space stations. Their planet showed signs of extensive industrial development, but nothing that could threaten a Veltar war fleet. "Sir," Communications Officer Wanho reported, "we are receiving multiple transmissions from the planet. They appear to have detected our arrival." "Put them on speakers," Hyun said. He was curious to hear what these humans would say when faced with the might of the Veltar Dominion. The first transmission was in a language his universal translator couldn't immediately process, but within moments the computer had decoded it. A nervous-sounding voice filled the bridge. "Unknown vessels, this is Earth Traffic Control. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions in our solar system." Hyun smiled, showing his sharp teeth. They thought this was a traffic control issue. How delightfully naive. The conquest of humanity was about to begin. Scout Captain Do-Yun adjusted his headset as more human transmissions flooded through the communication system. The aliens were talking constantly, sending signals to each other across their planet and to various points throughout their solar system. Most of it seemed to be routine communications, but some of the content puzzled him. "Commander Hyun," he called out, "I think you should listen to some of these transmissions." Hyun walked over to Do-Hyun's station. The young scout had been monitoring human communications for the past 6 hours, trying to understand their society before the conquest began. It was standard procedure to learn about a species before destroying them. Sometimes useful information could be gathered for future campaigns. "What have you discovered?" Hyun asked. "Well, sir, most of their communications are normal for a primitive species, but some of them are very strange. Listen to this." Do-Yun played a recording of what appeared to be a human entertainment broadcast. Strange music filled the bridge, followed by a human voice describing something called a movie about creatures from space who came to destroy Earth. The humans in the story fought back against the aliens using various weapons and tactics. "They make entertainment about fighting aliens?" Hyun asked, confused. "Yes, sir. They have hundreds of these stories. Movies, books, games, all about fighting invaders from space. Some of them show humans winning these battles." Hyun found this amusing. These humans actually entertained themselves with fantasies about defeating advanced alien civilizations. It showed a level of imagination that was rare among primitive species, even if it was completely unrealistic. Fleet Admiral Miran's voice crackled through the communication system. "Commander Hyun, report to my flagship immediately for tactical briefing." Hyun left his bridge and took a shuttle to the fleet's command ship, the Dominion's Wrath. Admiral Miran was one of the most experienced officers in the Veltar military, having overseen the conquest of over 300 worlds during her career. She was known for her efficiency and her complete lack of mercy toward inferior species. The Admiral's war room was filled with holographic displays showing the human solar system from every angle. Tactical data scrolled across the screens, highlighting potential targets and defensive positions. Several other fleet commanders were already present, studying the information. "Gentlemen," Admiral Moran began, "we are dealing with a typical primitive species. They have no significant space-based defenses, and their weapons technology is thousands of years behind ours. However, there are some unusual factors that require discussion." She activated a holographic display showing Earth in detail. The planet was covered with cities, industrial complexes, and what appeared to be military installations. Thousands of small dots moved across the surface, representing vehicles and aircraft. First, this species has achieved a remarkable level of industrial development for their technology level. They have built extensive transportation networks and manufacturing capabilities. Second, and more importantly, they appear to be in a constant state of warfare with each other. One of the other commanders, Captain Soman, spoke up. "Sir, how does internal warfare affect our conquest strategy?" "It means they may be more militaristic than typical primitives," Admiral Moran replied. "They might actually try to fight back instead of surrendering immediately. This could make the campaign more interesting, but it shouldn't affect the outcome." The Admiral changed the display to show Earth's military installations. Red dots appeared across the planet, marking locations where humans kept their weapons and soldiers. There were thousands of them. Tactical Officer Jihoon has completed his analysis of their military capabilities. The Admiral continued. Jihoon, please share your findings. Jihoon stood and activated his own display. The humans maintain standing armies totaling approximately 50 million soldiers worldwide. They are equipped with chemical explosive weapons, projectile firearms, and primitive aircraft. Some of their weapons appear to be nuclear in nature, though their delivery systems are very basic. Nuclear weapons caught everyone's attention. Very few primitive species developed nuclear technology before achieving spaceflight, and those that did usually destroyed themselves with it. The fact that humans had nuclear weapons and were still alive suggested they might be more disciplined than most primitives. Their nuclear arsenal is significant by primitive standards, Jihoon continued. They possess approximately 15,000 nuclear warheads of various sizes. However, most of these are designed for warfare against each other, not for space defense. Admiral Moran nodded. 15,000 nuclear weapons represent substantial destructive power, but they cannot deliver them to our ships. Our shields can easily deflect any missiles they might launch at us. The briefing continued for another hour, covering human population centers, industrial capabilities, and potential resistance strongholds. When it was finished, Admiral Moran outlined the conquest strategy. We will use standard subjugation protocol, she announced. Captain Soman will take her ship, the Eternal Hunger, to Earth orbit and deliver the surrender demand. If they refuse, she will demonstrate our power by destroying one of their military installations. After they see what our weapons can do, they will surrender. Captain Soman accepted her orders with professional calm. She had delivered surrender demands to dozens of species over the years. The routine was always the same. Appear in orbit, demand submission to the Dominion, wait for the inevitable surrender, and then begin the occupation process. What if they don't surrender after the demonstration? Asked Commander Hyan. Then we proceed to Phase 2, Admiral Moran replied. Orbital bombardment of all major population centers until they submit. If they still refuse, we sterilize the planet and move on to our next target. The commanders were dismissed to prepare their ships. As Hyan returned to his flagship, he found himself thinking about the humans and their strange entertainment stories about fighting aliens. It was almost as if they had been preparing for this day their entire lives, even though they couldn't possibly have known the Veltar were coming. Back on his bridge, Communications Officer Wanho was still monitoring human transmissions. "Sir," he reported, "the humans are definitely aware of our presence. Their communications have changed significantly since we arrived." "How so?" Hyan asked. "They're coordinating something. Military units are being moved around their planet, and they're sending encrypted messages between their various governments. It looks like they're preparing for something." This was unusual. Most species panicked when they first encountered Veltar ships. Their communications typically became chaotic and disorganized as their leaders tried to figure out what was happening. But these humans seemed to be responding in an organized manner. "Are they trying to evacuate their population?" Hyan asked. "No, sir. It looks more like they're mobilizing their military forces." Hyan was impressed despite himself. These humans were actually preparing to fight rather than surrender immediately. It had been a long time since the Veltar had encountered a species with that much courage, even if it was hopeless courage. The Eternal Hunger broke away from the main fleet and began its approach to Earth. Captain Soman would reach the planet in 6 hours and deliver the standard surrender demand. Based on human behavior so far, Hyan suspected they might actually refuse the first offer, which would make this campaign more entertaining than usual. He settled into his command chair to wait. Whatever happened next, It would probably be over. Quickly. The humans might be brave, but bravery was no match for superior technology and overwhelming firepower. In a few days, Earth would be just another conquered world in the Veltar Dominion, and humanity would be just another footnote in their military history. The only question was how much resistance they would put up before the inevitable end. Captain Soman watched Earth grow larger on her view screen as the eternal hunger approached the planet. She had performed this ritual hundreds of times with dozens of different species, and it never failed to amuse her. The moment alien civilizations saw a Veltar warship in their sky, they usually panicked completely. Some tried to flee their planets, others tried to hide, and a few brave ones attempted to attack with whatever primitive weapons they possessed. All of them eventually surrendered. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "we are receiving multiple transmissions from the planet. They want to establish contact." "Put the strongest signal through the universal translator," Somin ordered. "Let's see what these humans have to say." The main screen flickered and showed the image of a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform. She had short black hair and carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. The universal translator converted her words into Veltar language with only a slight delay. "Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Nari Park of the Terran. Defense Force, we welcome you to our solar system and hope your intentions are peaceful. Please respond and identify yourselves." Somin was surprised by several things. First, this human showed no visible signs of fear despite the massive warship hanging in orbit above her planet. Second, she claimed to represent something called a Terran Defense Force, which suggested the humans had somehow unified their military command structure since the Veltar fleet arrived. Third, she was speaking as if this were a normal diplomatic contact rather than an invasion. "Prepare the standard surrender demand," Salman told her communications officer. "Use the formal version with all the traditional warnings. The surrender demand was a document that had been refined over 3,000 years of conquest. It explained the power of the Veltar Dominion, described the futility of resistance, and offered the target species a choice between submission and extinction. It had never failed to achieve the desired result. The transmission was sent to Earth, and Soman waited for the predictable response. Usually, species took several hours to debate the demand among their leaders before accepting it. A few took days, but they all accepted it eventually. The response came back in less than 30 minutes. Admiral Park appeared on the screen again, still showing no signs of fear or panic. "Captain Soman of the Veltar vessel Eternal Hunger, we have received and reviewed your surrender demand. We appreciate your offer to incorporate Earth into your dominion, but we must respectfully decline. Our species values independence and self-determination. We suggest you leave our solar system immediately to avoid any unfortunate misunderstandings." For a moment, Soman thought there had been a translation error. No species had ever refused a Veltar surrender demand. It was simply unthinkable. The universal translator must have gotten something wrong. "Communications. Replay that transmission and verify the translation," she ordered. The message played again with the same result. The humans were politely but firmly refusing to surrender. They were actually telling the Veltar to leave their system. Soman had never encountered anything like this in her entire military career. "Sir," her tactical officer reported, "I'm detecting increased activity across the planet. It looks like they're moving military equipment and personnel." Soman activated the tactical display and studied the information. The humans were indeed mobilizing their forces, but not in the chaotic panic she expected. Their movements appeared organized and purposeful, as if they were implementing a previously prepared plan. "Are they evacuating their population centers?" she asked. "No, sir. They appear to be reinforcing them. And, sir, I'm detecting some unusual energy signatures from several locations on the planet." This was getting more interesting by the minute. Salman opened a communication channel to Admiral Miran's flagship to report the unusual situation. "Admiral, the humans have refused our surrender demand," she reported. "They are requesting that we leave their system." There was a long pause before Admiral Miran responded. "Captain, please repeat that. Did you say they refused our demand?" "Yes, sir. They were very polite about it, but they clearly refused. They're also mobilizing their military forces planet-wide." Another pause. "Captain Soman, in 3,000 years of Veltar expansion, no species has ever refused our initial surrender demand. Are you certain the translation was accurate?" "I've verified it multiple times, sir. They definitely refused." Admiral Moran's voice carried a note of curiosity when she responded. "How interesting. They must not understand the reality of their situation. Proceed with Phase 2 of the protocol. Destroy one of their military installations to demonstrate our capabilities. That should clarify things for them." Soman acknowledged the order and began scanning Earth for a suitable target. The planet was covered with military bases, some quite large. She selected what appeared to be a naval facility on one of their coastlines, far enough from major population centers to avoid excessive civilian casualties. "Prepare the primary plasma cannon," she ordered. "Target the naval base at coordinates 37.2 north, 76.4 west. But as the Eternal Hunger moved into firing position, something unexpected happened. The human Admiral Park appeared on their communication screen again. "Captain Soman, our sensors indicate you are preparing to fire on one of our military installations. Before you do, I want you to understand something important about humanity. We have been fighting wars on this planet for our entire history. We know what warfare looks like, and we know what invasion looks like. You are not the first to underestimate us, and you probably won't be the last." Soman found the humans' calm confidence unsettling. Most species begged for mercy at this point in the process. They didn't issue warnings to superior forces. "Your threats are meaningless," Soman replied. "You cannot harm this ship with your primitive weapons." Admiral Park smiled, and for some reason that expression made Soman feel uncomfortable. "Captain, that facility you're about to attack is Norfolk Naval Base. It was decommissioned and evacuated 6 months ago when our deep space sensors first detected artificial objects moving toward our system. We've been preparing for this encounter for quite some time. This revelation was shocking. The humans had detected the Veltar fleet 6 months ago? That should have been impossible with their primitive sensor technology. And they had been preparing for 6 months? "If you proceed with your attack," Admiral Park continued, "you should know that we will consider it an act of war and respond accordingly. This is your only warning." Soman was beginning to feel something she had never experienced before in combat: uncertainty. Everything about this encounter was wrong. The humans weren't behaving like any species she had ever conquered. They seemed to know things they shouldn't know, and were prepared for things they shouldn't be prepared for. "Admiral," she said, "are you seriously threatening to attack a Veltar warship with your primitive technology?" "Captain Salman, we're not threatening anything. We're simply informing you of the consequences of your actions. If you attack our world, we will defend ourselves with everything we have. And I want you to know that everything we have is considerably more than you think it is." Salman decided to end this ridiculous conversation. No primitive species could threaten a Veltar heavy cruiser, no matter how prepared they claimed to be. She would destroy their empty naval base, and then they would see the futility of resistance. "Fire!" she commanded. The plasma cannon discharged, sending a beam of superheated energy toward the Earth's surface. The beam struck the naval facility and vaporized several square kilometers of land in a brilliant flash of light. When the energy dissipated, nothing remained but a smoking crater where the base had been. "There," Samin announced to her crew. "Now they understand what they're dealing with." But instead of the panicked surrender she expected, Admiral Parks' face appeared on the screen again. The human looked sad rather than frightened. "I'm sorry you chose that path, Captain. We really hoped this could be resolved peacefully." Before Soman could respond, her tactical officer shouted an alarm. "Captain, multiple energy signatures activating across the planet. I'm reading weapon locks from everywhere." The main display lit up with targeting indicators as thousands of previously hidden installations across Earth's surface came online simultaneously. Energy readings spiked across the planet as weapons Soman didn't know existed pointed directly at her ship. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Admiral Parks' voice came through the speakers one final time. "Captain Soman, you just fired the first shot in a war you don't understand against an enemy you've never encountered before. That was your only free shot. Every shot after this one will cost you." The eternal hunger was suddenly surrounded by streaks of light as projectiles launched from Earth's surface. But these weren't the primitive missiles Soman expected. They were moving far too fast and coming from directions that should have been impossible. For the first time in her military career, Captain Soman felt afraid. The first projectile hit the eternal hunger with enough force to shake the entire ship. Soman gripped her command chair as alarms blared throughout the bridge. Her tactical officer was shouting readings that made no sense. "Shield strength down to 70%, he reported. "How is that possible? Those looked like simple kinetic projectiles." Soman stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The humans were hitting her ship with what appeared to be chunks of metal moving at incredible speeds. Her shields were designed to deflect advanced energy weapons and high-tech missiles, not primitive projectiles. But somehow these simple pieces of metal were punching through her defenses like they didn't exist. "Return fire," she ordered. "Target the launch sites." The Eternal Hunger's weapon systems locked onto the human launch platforms and fired. Plasma, beams, and particle cannons struck Earth's surface, creating massive explosions where the human weapons had been hidden. But instead of silencing the attack, even more launch sites activated across the planet. "Captain," her sensor operator called. "Out. I'm detecting massive movement on the far side of their moon. Something big is moving into position." The main screen shifted to show Earth's natural satellite. What Soman saw made her blood run cold. The entire far side of the moon was opening up like a flower, revealing weapon batteries that dwarfed anything on Earth's surface. The humans had turned their moon into a weapons platform. "Impossible," she whispered. "They're primitives. They don't have the technology for this." A new voice came through the communication system, different from Admiral Park. This one sounded younger and more excited. "Veltar vessel, this is Colonel Minsu Kim, commanding Luna Defense Station. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal from Earth orbit before we demonstrate why nobody messes with our planet." "Luna Defense Station?" Soman repeated. "They named their moon after a defensive position?" Her communications officer nodded grimly. "Sir, I'm also picking up transmissions from something called Mars Forward Base and Asteroid Belt Patrol. I think they've militarized their entire solar system." This was getting worse by the minute. Not only were the humans refusing to surrender, they seemed to have been preparing for war on a scale that should have been impossible for a primitive species. The moon-based weapons were now tracking the eternal hunger, and Soman could see the massive energy buildup that preceded a major weapons discharge. "Emergency jump," she ordered. "Get us out of here." But before her ship could activate its hyperdrive, the lunar weapons fired. Beams of coherent energy struck the eternal hunger from multiple directions, overwhelming the shields completely and scoring deep hits on the hull. Atmosphere began venting from several sections, and half the bridge stations went dark. Hull breach. "On decks 4 through 7, damage control reported. "We've lost main power to the weapon systems." Soman felt the ship shudder as more projectiles from Earth struck the damaged hull. Her proud warship, which had participated in the conquest of dozens of worlds, was being torn apart by humans using weapons that shouldn't have been able to scratch the paint. "How are they doing this?" she demanded. Her tactical officer was studying the sensor readings with growing amazement. "Sir, I think I understand. These aren't advanced weapons. They're using simple kinetic projectiles, but they're accelerating them to incredible speeds using magnetic fields. And their energy weapons appear to be modified mining lasers operating at power levels that should be impossible." Modified mining equipment. Soman couldn't believe what she was hearing. "They're fighting us with mining equipment?" "Not just mining equipment, sir. I'm detecting weapons made from repurposed spacecraft engines, modified industrial machinery, and what appears to be weaponized construction equipment. They've turned their entire industrial base into a weapons factory." Another barrage from the lunar station struck the ship, this time targeting the engines. The eternal hunger lost power to its main drive and began drifting helplessly in Earth's orbit. Emergency lighting cast an eerie glow across the bridge as the crew worked frantically to restore basic systems. Admiral Park's voice came through the speakers again, calm and professional, despite the battle raging around them. "Captain Soman, your ship is severely damaged and you are in no condition to continue this fight. We are prepared to allow you to withdraw and return to your fleet. This offer will remain open for exactly 10 minutes. Soman wanted to refuse, wanted to keep fighting, but she had to face reality. Her ship was crippled, her crew was wounded, and the humans had demonstrated capabilities that defied everything she thought she knew about primitive species. If she stayed, the eternal hunger would be destroyed. "Prepare for emergency withdrawal," she ordered reluctantly. "Signal the main fleet that we are disengaging." As her ship limped away from Earth using auxiliary power, Soman studied the battle damage reports. 60% of her crew was dead or wounded. The ship would need months of repairs before it could fight again. All of this caused by a species that was supposed to surrender without resistance. But the most disturbing part wasn't the damage her ship had taken. It was what she had learned about humanity during the brief engagement. The humans had been monitoring Veltar movements for months. They had prepared for war using improvised weapons and modified industrial equipment. Most importantly, they had shown no fear and no hesitation when faced with superior alien technology. As the eternal hunger reached the edge of the solar system, Communications Officer Wanho made a discovery that chilled everyone on the bridge. "Sir, I've been analyzing the human communications during the battle. They're treating this like a training exercise." "What do you mean?" Soman asked. "Their military units were calling it Live Fire Exercise Omega and discussing acceptable performance parameters." "Sir, I think they've been preparing for alien invasion for so long that they actually drilled for it. They had procedures in place for everything we did." Somin stared at the sensor readings, showing Earth growing smaller behind them. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, just a blue and green world orbiting an ordinary star. But now she knew better. That innocent-looking planet was actually a fortress world inhabited by a species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare. When the Eternal Hunger finally reached Admiral Moran's flagship, Somin was immediately summoned to give her report. She found the Admiral waiting in the war room, surrounded by other fleet commanders who had heard fragments of the engagement over the communication system. "Captain Somin," Admiral Moran began, "your ship appears to have sustained significant damage. Please explain what happened." Somin activated the tactical display and began her report. As she described the human defenses, the modified weapons, and the lunar fortress, she watched the expressions on her fellow officers' faces change, from confidence to confusion to concern. "Are you telling me," Admiral Moran said slowly, "that a primitive species with no spacefaring capability nearly destroyed a Veltar heavy cruiser using modified mining equipment?" "Yes, sir. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that they were ready for us. They've been preparing for alien invasion for decades, maybe centuries. They have contingency plans, backup weapons, and defensive positions that we never detected. And, sir, based on their communications, I don't think we've seen even a fraction of what they're capable of." The war room fell silent as the implications sank in. For 3,000 years, the Veltar had conquered the galaxy through superior technology and overwhelming force. But humanity appeared to be something entirely different. They weren't more advanced than the Veltar, but they were more prepared for war than any species the Dominion had ever encountered. Admiral Moran studied the tactical data for several minutes before speaking. "Captain Somin, in your professional opinion, can this human resistance be overcome with conventional invasion tactics?" Somin thought about the question carefully. She remembered the calm confidence in Admiral Park's voice, the incredible coordination of the human defenses, and the devastating effectiveness of their improvised weapons. "Sir," she said finally, "I think we're going to need a much bigger fleet." Fleet Admiral Moran stood in the center of her war room, staring at the holographic display showing the human solar system. 3 days had passed since Captain Somin's retreat, and the Admiral was still trying to understand what had happened. In 3,000 years of Veltar expansion, no single ship had ever been forced to retreat from a primitive world. The fact that it had happened at all was disturbing. The fact that it had happened so quickly was terrifying. "Communications Officer Wanho," she called out. "What have you learned from monitoring human transmission since the engagement?" Wanho looked uncomfortable as he consulted his data. "Admiral, the humans are celebrating." "Celebrating?" "Yes, sir. They're treating the retreat of the Eternal Hunger as a victory. But more disturbing is what they're saying about us. They seem to think we were testing their defenses, and they're discussing how to improve their performance for the next encounter." Admiral Moran felt a chill run down her spine. The humans thought the Veltar had been testing them. That suggested a level of confidence that went beyond mere bravery and entered the realm of arrogance. What kind of species assumed that an alien warship attack was just a test? "What else have you discovered?" she asked. "Sir, I've been analyzing their military communications, and I found something very disturbing. The humans have a concept they call acceptable losses. Based on their planning documents, they consider casualties up to 30% of their total population to be acceptable in a major conflict." The war room fell silent. 30%. Casualties meant over 2 billion dead humans, and they considered that acceptable? Most species surrendered when casualties reached even 1% of their population. Furthermore, Wanho continued, they appear to have been planning for what they call total war scenarios for decades. They have detailed strategies for continuing to fight even after their government is destroyed, their cities are leveled, and their military is decimated. Admiral Moran was beginning to understand why the Eternal Hunger had been forced to retreat. The Veltar were dealing with a species that had spent centuries preparing for the worst possible wars imaginable. Every human was potentially a soldier, and every piece of human technology was potentially a weapon. "Tactical Officer Jihoon," she said, "what is your assessment of human military capabilities based on the engagement data?" Jihoon activated his own display, showing detailed analysis of the human weapons that had damaged the Eternal Hunger. "Sir, the humans demonstrate an unusual approach to warfare. Instead of developing advanced weapons, they focus on making simple weapons extremely effective. Their kinetic projectiles are just pieces of metal, but they accelerate them to speeds that create devastating impact forces." The display showed computer simulations of the human weapons in action. It was impressive and terrifying to watch simple technology being used with such devastating effectiveness. More importantly, Jihoon continued, they appear to have militarized their entire civilization. Every factory can produce weapons, every civilian vehicle can be converted for military use, and every citizen appears to have basic military training. They're not just an army with a country, they're a country that is an army. Intelligence Officer Taeyang spoke up from his station. "Sir, I've made an even more disturbing discovery. I've been analyzing human historical records, and I think I understand why they're so prepared for war." "Explain," Admiral Moran ordered. "Sir, humanity has never known peace. In their entire recorded history, there has never been a single day when humans somewhere on their planet weren't engaged in armed conflict with other humans. They have been practicing warfare continuously for thousands of years." This revelation hit the assembled officers like a physical blow. The Veltar had conquered countless species, but they had never encountered one that had been practicing war for its entire existence. Most species developed warfare as a tool for specific conflicts and then returned to peace. But humans seem to treat war as a natural state of being. They have detailed records of conflicts involving millions of soldiers and lasting for years, Taeyang continued. They've developed tactics for fighting in every possible environment, using every imaginable weapon against every conceivable enemy. They've even fought wars where both sides had nuclear weapons and somehow managed not to destroy their planet. Admiral Moran was beginning to realize that the Veltar had encountered something unprecedented. Humanity wasn't just another primitive species to be conquered. They were a species that had evolved specifically for warfare, and they had spent thousands of years perfecting their skills. "Sir," Commander Hyan spoke from his position near the tactical display, "I recommend we proceed with a full-scale invasion using the entire conquest fleet. If these humans are as dangerous as they appear, we need to overwhelm them quickly before they can adapt to our technology." "I disagree," said Captain Soman, who had been invited to participate despite her ship's damaged condition. "Sir, based on my direct encounter with them, I believe a larger fleet would just give them more targets to practice on. These humans aren't afraid of superior numbers or advanced technology. If anything, they seem to enjoy the challenge." Admiral Moran considered both viewpoints. The standard Veltar approach was to use overwhelming force to crush resistance quickly, but nothing about humanity fits standard patterns, and their response to overwhelming force might be very different from other species. "Intelligence Officer Taeyang," she said, "have you found any evidence of human weaknesses or divisions that we could exploit?" "That's the problem, sir. The humans did divide into competing factions throughout their history, but the moment we appeared, they unified instantly. All their internal conflicts have been suspended, and they're cooperating at a level we've never seen from any species. It's as if the threat of alien invasion activated some sort of species-wide defense mechanism. Communications Officer Wanho raised his hand. Sir, I have new intelligence that supports that theory. I've been monitoring human communications, and they're sharing military technology and tactical information between groups that were enemies just months ago. They're treating our invasion as a common threat that supersedes all their internal conflicts. This was the worst possible news. The Veltar conquest strategy depended partly on exploiting divisions within target species. If humanity had achieved perfect unity in the face of invasion, traditional tactics would be much less effective. Sir, Tactical Officer Ji-hoon added, there's something else you should know about human capabilities. I've been analyzing the weapons they used against the Eternal Hunger, and I believe they were holding back. Holding back? Admiral Moran repeated. Yes, sir. The kinetic projectiles that damaged our ship were moving at approximately 30% of maximum theoretical velocity for their acceleration technology. The energy weapons were operating at roughly 40% of their maximum possible output. I think they were testing our defenses without revealing their full capabilities. The implications of this were staggering. If the humans had been holding back during their first encounter, then the Veltar still didn't know what humanity was truly capable of. They had won the engagement while using less than half their available firepower. Admiral Moran made her decision. We will proceed with a full invasion using 12 heavy cruisers and the dreadnought Galactic Dominion. But we will not underestimate these humans again. This will be a total war scenario from the beginning. As the fleet prepared for battle, Communications Officer Wanho made one final discovery that chilled everyone who heard it. He had been monitoring human entertainment broadcasts and found something that revealed the true nature of their enemy. Sir, he reported, the humans are broadcasting music during their preparations for war. Music? Admiral Moran asked. Yes, sir, but not peaceful music. They're playing something they call war songs that celebrate combat and encourage their warriors to fight to the death. Sir, they're not just preparing for war. They're looking forward to it. Admiral Moran realized that humanity represented something the Veltar had never encountered before. A species that didn't just fight when necessary, but actually enjoyed fighting. They weren't defending their world out of desperation or duty. They were defending it because they wanted to test themselves against the most dangerous enemy they had ever faced. The Veltar were about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object that was looking forward to the collision. The Veltar invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system with enough firepower to level a dozen worlds. 12 heavy cruisers and the massive dreadnought Galactic Dominion formed an attack formation that had never failed to achieve victory. Admiral Moran stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the blue dot of Earth grow larger on the main screen. This time there would be no surrender demands, no warnings, and no mercy. The humans would be destroyed quickly and efficiently. All. Ships report ready for combat, her tactical officer announced. Weapon systems are charged and targeting solutions are locked. Begin the attack, Admiral Moran ordered. I want that planet reduced to ash within 6 hours. The Veltar fleet moved toward Earth like an unstoppable wave of destruction. Their weapons could crack continents and boil oceans. Their shields could deflect anything a primitive species might throw at them. This should have been the end of humanity. Instead, it was the beginning of something impossible. The first sign that something was wrong came when Lieutenant Kyung detected movement throughout the asteroid belt. Sir, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the outer system. It looks like asteroids are changing course. Admiral Miran studied the sensor readings with growing concern. Dozens of asteroids were indeed changing course, accelerating toward the Veltar fleet at speeds that should have been impossible for natural objects. As they got closer, it became clear that these weren't asteroids at all. Those are ships, Admiral Moran realized. The humans have been hiding ships in the asteroid belt, but they weren't normal ships. As the human vessels came into visual range, the Veltar could see that they were cobbled together from mining equipment, cargo haulers, and industrial machinery. They looked like flying scrap yards, held together with spare parts and determination. "Sir," Communications Officer Wanho reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel. Put it on screen," Admiral Moran ordered. A human male appeared on the display, wearing what looked like a modified mining suit and grinning like this was the best day of his life. "Veltar Fleet, this is Captain Jong-hun of the converted cargo, Hauler Defiant Scrap. On behalf of the Asteroid Belt Mining Collective, I want you to know that you just flew into the wrong neighborhood." The transmission cut off, and the human ships opened fire. But instead of energy weapons or missiles, they were shooting pieces of asteroid at relativistic speeds. Chunks of rock and metal that had been mined from the belt were now being launched at the Veltar fleet like the biggest shotgun blast in history. The Galactic Dominion shuddered as hundreds of projectiles struck its shields. Each impact was relatively small, but there were so many of them that the combined effect was devastating. Warning lights flashed across the bridge as shield generators overloaded. "How are they accelerating asteroids to these speeds?" Admiral Moran demanded. "Sir, it appears they've weaponized their mining equipment," her tactical officer replied. "They're using mass drivers designed for moving ore to shoot raw materials at us. This was insane." The humans were fighting the most advanced military in the galaxy using tools designed for digging holes in rocks, and somehow it was working. The Veltar fleet returned fire, their plasma cannons reaching out to destroy the improvised human ships. But the humans weren't fighting like any enemy the Veltar had ever encountered. When their ships took damage, they didn't retreat or explode. They kept fighting. Lieutenant Kyung watched in amazement as a human ship lost half its hull to a plasma blast and somehow continued operating. "Sir, that ship should be dead. It has no atmosphere, no main power, and half its crew must be gone. But it's still shooting at us." "Humans don't follow normal rules of warfare," Admiral Moran said grimly. "They fight until they're physically incapable of fighting, and sometimes even after that." As the battle continued, more impossible things happened. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting with jury-rigged repairs and backup systems that shouldn't have existed. Human pilots ejected from disabled fighters and somehow managed to board Veltar vessels using nothing but emergency life support and improvised weapons. "Sir," his tactical officer shouted, "we have boarders on Deck 7. Admiral Miran couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Boarders? How did they get past our shields?" "Sir, it appears a human pilot deliberately crashed his ship into our docking bay and survived the impact. He's now fighting our security teams with hand tools and what appears to be a welding torch." This was beyond insane. It was impossible. A human had survived a ship-to-ship collision and was now fighting Veltar warriors in hand-to-hand combat using construction equipment. And according to the reports, he was winning. The battle raged for hours, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The Veltar had superior technology and firepower, but the humans had superior determination and an apparently unlimited ability to improvise deadly weapons from ordinary equipment. "Sir," Tactical Officer Jahoon reported, "the human forces are adapting to our weapons in real time. They're modifying their shields and armor based on our attack patterns." "How is that possible?" Admiral Moran asked. "Sir, I think they're treating this battle as a learning experience. Every time we hit them with something, they figure out how to defend against it better. They're using our own attacks to improve their defenses." This was the most disturbing revelation yet. Not only were the humans refusing to die when they should be dead, they were actually getting better at fighting the longer the battle continued. They were using the Veltar attack as a training exercise. Lieutenant Kyung made an even more disturbing discovery. "Sir, I'm detecting new human ships arriving from the direction of Mars. But these aren't converted mining vessels. These appear to be purpose-built warships. The new ships were sleek and deadly-looking, clearly designed for combat rather than improvised from civilian equipment. As they engaged the Veltar fleet, it became clear that humanity had been preparing for this war for longer than anyone had realized." "Sir," Intelligence Officer Tae Yang reported, "I've been analyzing human communications during the battle. They're not just fighting us. They're studying us. Every engagement is being recorded and analyzed to improve their tactics for the next encounter." Admiral Moran was beginning to understand the true horror of their situation. The humans weren't just defending their world. They were learning how to fight the Veltar more effectively. Every battle was making them more dangerous, not less. But the most chilling moment came when Communications Officer Wanho intercepted a transmission between human commanders. "Sir, you need to hear this." The transmission played on the bridge. Speakers. It was Admiral Park's voice, calm and professional as always. "All units, this is Terra Command. Phase 1 objectives have been achieved. The aliens have committed their main force to direct engagement. Begin Phase 2 operations immediately." "Phase 2, Admiral Moran repeated. "This was only Phase 1, sir." Answer came in the form of new contacts appearing on sensors throughout the solar system. Human ships emerged from hiding places that the Veltar hadn't even known existed. The moon opened up again, revealing weapon batteries that made the previous engagement look like a minor skirmish. And from Earth itself, massive orbital elevators began launching what appeared to be entire military bases into space. Admiral Moran realized with growing horror that everything they had seen so far had been just the beginning. The humans had been holding back, using the initial engagements to study Veltar capabilities while revealing as little as possible about their own strength. "Sir," her tactical officer reported, "we're detecting launch signatures from Earth's surface. Thousands of them." The main screen showed Earth surrounded by a cloud of ascending objects. Missiles, fighters, orbital platforms, and things that defied classification were rising from the planet in numbers that seemed impossible for a primitive species to possess. "How many ships do they have?" Admiral Moran whispered. "Communications." Officer Wanho provided the answer that confirmed her worst fears. "Sir, based on the communications traffic I'm monitoring, I estimate they have over 10,000 combat-capable vessels of various sizes hidden throughout their solar system. 10,000 ships. The Veltar had brought 13 vessels to conquer humanity, and the humans had 10,000 ships waiting for them. The odds weren't just bad, they were ridiculous." For the first time in her career, Fleet Admiral Miran gave an order she had never thought she would give. "All ships, prepare for emergency withdrawal. We're retreating." As the battered Veltar fleet began its escape from the human solar system, Admiral Moran couldn't help but wonder what kind of species humanity really was. They had turned their entire civilization into a war machine, and they had been preparing for alien invasion for so long that they actually seemed to be enjoying it. The Veltar were the galaxy's apex predators, but they had just encountered something more dangerous than themselves, a species that had spent thousands of years learning how to fight anything and everything, including things that hadn't been invented yet. The impossible war had begun, and the Veltar were losing. The Veltar fleet limped through hyperspace, carrying the wounded survivors of the most devastating defeat in their 3,000-year history. Of the 13 ships that had attacked Earth, only 8 remained functional. The mighty Dreadnought. Galactic Dominion was a floating wreck, held together by emergency repairs and desperation. Admiral Miran sat in her damaged command chair, staring at casualty reports that told a story of impossible human resistance. "Sir," Communications Officer Wanho reported, "we're receiving priority transmissions from High Command. They want a full report on the engagement." Admiral Miran dreaded making that report. How could she explain to the Veltar leadership that humanity had not only defeated their invasion fleet, but had done so while apparently holding back most of their military strength? How could she describe warriors who refused to die even when their ships were destroyed around them? "Sir," Tactical Officer Jehoon interrupted, "I'm detecting pursuit signatures. Something is following us through hyperspace." This was impossible. The humans didn't have hyperspace technology. Their ships couldn't possibly track a Veltar fleet through dimensions they shouldn't even know existed. But the sensor readings were clear. Multiple contacts were following their exact course through hyperspace. "How many?" Admiral Moran asked. "At least 12 ships, sir." "But, sir, these energy signatures don't match anything we encountered at Earth. These appear to be different ships entirely." Admiral Moran felt a chill of realization. The humans hadn't just defeated the Veltar fleet. They were now hunting them through space using technology that should have been beyond their capabilities. "Prepare for emergency exit from hyperspace," she ordered. "If they want to continue this fight, we'll face them in normal space where we have better sensor capabilities." The Veltar fleet dropped out of hyperspace near a dead star system, far from any inhabited worlds. Admiral Moran hoped the isolation would prevent human reinforcements from arriving, giving her damaged ships a chance to fight on more equal terms. But as the human ships appeared, she realized that equal terms were no longer possible. The pursuing vessels were unlike anything humanity had shown before. They were sleek, fast, and clearly built for deep space operations. Most disturbing of all, they moved with a coordination that suggested a level of tactical sophistication the Veltar hadn't expected from a primitive species. "Sir," Intelligence Officer Taeyang reported, "I'm analyzing the human ship designs, and I think I know how they're tracking us. It appears they've been reverse engineering our technology from the debris left behind during previous engagements." The lead human ship opened a communication channel, and Captain Soman's voice crackled through the speakers. But this wasn't the Captain Soman of the Eternal Hunger. This was a human using her name as some sort of psychological warfare tactic. "Veltar Fleet, this is Captain Soman of the human vessel Righteous Fury. We would like to thank you for the generous donation of advanced technology you left behind during your retreat from Earth. Your hyperdrive components have been particularly educational." Admiral Moran was stunned. The humans had not only copied Veltar technology, they were naming their ships after Veltar officers and using their own tactics against them. This level of adaptive warfare went beyond anything in Veltar. "Experience. We offer you the same choice you offered us," the human continued. "Surrender immediately or be destroyed." The audacity was breathtaking. A primitive species that shouldn't even have spaceflight was demanding the surrender of the galaxy's most advanced military force. But looking at her damaged ships and depleted, Crew's Admiral Miran had to admit that the demand wasn't entirely unreasonable. "Sir," Lieutenant Keong reported, "the human ships are moving into attack formation. But, sir, they're using Veltar tactical patterns. They've somehow learned our own strategies and are preparing to use them against us." The battle that followed was unlike anything in Veltar military history. The humans attacked using modified Veltar tactics, but with improvements that made them more effective than the originals. They had studied every aspect of Veltar warfare and found ways to make it better. "They're not just copying our technology," Tactical Officer Jihoon observed. "They're improving it. Their weapons are more efficient, their shields are stronger, and their tactics are more sophisticated than ours." What made it worse was that the humans were clearly enjoying themselves. Their communications were filled with excitement and enthusiasm, as if hunting down the galaxy's most feared military force was the most fun they'd had in years. "Sir," Communications Officer Wanho reported, "I'm intercepting human communications. They're treating this like a training exercise. They're discussing optimal engagement distances and efficiency improvements for future battles." Admiral A. Miran realized that humanity was using their pursuit of the Veltar fleet as a learning experience. They weren't just trying to destroy the remaining ships. They were studying how to fight more effectively against advanced alien technology. The running battle continued for hours, with the humans herding the Veltar fleet toward an empty region of space. It gradually became clear that this wasn't random. The humans had a destination in mind, and they were forcing the Veltar to go there. "Sir," Sensor Operator Yunji called out, "I'm detecting multiple ships ahead of us. It looks like more human vessels." The main screen showed a formation of human ships waiting in their path. But these weren't warships. They appeared to be converted. Cargo vessels and mining ships, similar to what the Veltar had encountered in the asteroid belt. The humans had set up an ambush using their industrial fleet. "They're herding us into a trap," Admiral Miran realized. "This entire pursuit was designed to drive us to this location." The human industrial ships opened fire with weapons that defied classification. Mining lasers that had been modified into siege guns, cargo launchers that fired improvised missiles, and construction equipment that somehow served as point defense systems. The Veltar fleet found itself caught between the pursuing warships and the ambushing industrial vessels. "Sir," Tactical Officer Jihoon reported, "I'm analyzing their weapons, and I think I understand their strategy. They're not trying to destroy us quickly. They're trying to capture our ships intact to study our technology." This was the most terrifying realization yet. The humans weren't just defeating the Veltar. They were harvesting their technology to become more dangerous in future encounters. Every battle was making humanity stronger while making their enemies weaker. "Emergency message to all Veltar forces," Admiral Miran ordered. "Transmit a galaxy-wide warning about human capabilities. Tell them that humanity represents an unprecedented threat to Dominion security." As the message was sent, the human ambush closed around the remaining Veltar ships. But instead of finishing them off, the humans did something unexpected. They offered terms. "Veltar fleet," came the voice of Admiral Park through the communication system. "We offer you one final opportunity. Surrender your ships and crews, and you will be treated according to the laws of war. Continue fighting, and we will be forced to destroy you." Admiral Miran looked around her damaged bridge at her wounded crew. They had fought bravely, but they were outmatched by an enemy that seemed to improve with every engagement. The humans had gone from primitive defenders to galaxy-threatening predators in a matter of weeks. "Sir," Communications Officer Wanho said quietly, "I recommend we accept their terms. These humans have demonstrated capabilities that exceed our own. If we continue fighting, we'll just be giving them more opportunities to study our technology. Admiral Moran made the most difficult decision of her career. Signal the human fleet. We accept their terms of surrender. As Veltar ships powered, down their weapons and prepared to be boarded by human forces, Admiral Moran reflected on how completely the situation had changed. The Veltar had come to Earth as conquerors and were leaving as prisoners. But more than that, they had awakened something terrible. Humanity had been a primitive species confined to one star system. Now they had advanced technology, proven military capabilities, and a demonstrated willingness to hunt their enemies across the galaxy. The Veltar had created their own worst nightmare, a species as militaristic as themselves, but more adaptable and more determined. "Sir," Intelligence Officer Tae-Yang said, "based on what we've seen, I believe humanity will not be content to remain in their solar system. They've proven they can defeat advanced alien forces, and they've acquired the technology for interstellar travel. I think they're going to start expanding." Admiral Moran nodded grimly. The galaxy's balance of power had shifted dramatically in just a few weeks. The Veltar Dominion, which had ruled through fear and superior technology for 3 millennia, was about to face a new rival, and this rival had spent thousands of years preparing for exactly this kind of conflict. As human boarding parties prepared to take control of the Veltar ships, Admiral Moran sent one final message to Dominion High Command. Humanity is no longer a primitive species to be conquered. They are now a major galactic power, and they have declared war on us. Recommend immediate defensive preparations for all Dominion worlds. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months had passed since the first Veltar ship entered human space, and the galaxy was no longer the same place. Commander Hyon sat in a human detention facility on what used to be the Veltar border world of Korthax Prime, watching through reinforced windows as human ships landed and took off with constant efficiency. The planet he had once helped burn was now a thriving human military base, rebuilt better than it had ever been before. His arm was gone, lost during a human boarding. Action that still gave him nightmares. The humans had somehow managed to fight hand-to-hand combat in a vacuum-breached ship, using improvised weapons and sheer determination. He had watched human soldiers continue fighting with injuries that should have killed them, motivated by something the Veltar had never encountered: the absolute refusal to accept defeat. "Commander Hyon," a familiar voice said behind him. He turned to see Admiral Park entering the detention area, wearing the same calm expression she had shown during their first contact. "How are you feeling today?" "Like a prisoner of war," Hyon replied honestly. "Though I admit, you humans treat your prisoners better than we treat our slaves." Admiral Park sat down across from him, setting a data pad on the table between them. "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss with you today. We've been analyzing Veltar military records from captured ships, and we've discovered something interesting about your expansion history." Hyon felt a familiar chill. The humans had proven to be disturbingly good at extracting information from captured technology and prisoners. They approached intelligence gathering with the same systematic efficiency they applied to everything else. "What have you discovered?" he asked. "Your people have conquered over 2,000 star systems in 3,000 years, Admiral Park said. "That's impressive by any standard. But we've noticed something unusual about your conquest pattern. You always attack primitive species, You never encountered serious resistance until you met us. This was true, though Hyan didn't like admitting it. The Veltar had built their empire by conquering species that couldn't fight back effectively. They had become the galaxy's dominant power by avoiding any real challenges. We also discovered something else, Admiral Park continued. You call yourselves the ultimate predators, but you've never actually faced another predator species. You've spent 3,000 years hunting prey. We've spent the same amount of time hunting each other. Jan understood what she was implying. The Veltar had become strong by fighting the weak, while humanity had become strong by fighting themselves. When the two philosophies met, only one could survive. What do you want from me? Jan asked. Information about Veltar defensive capabilities, Admiral Park replied. Specifically, we want to know about your homeworld's defenses. Hyan felt his blood turn cold. You're planning to attack the Dominion capital? We're planning to end this war, Admiral Park corrected. Your people started this conflict when you demanded our surrender. We intend to finish it by demanding yours. Before Hyan could respond, an alert siren began wailing throughout the facility. Through the windows, he could see human ships launching from the base in response to some emergency. Admiral Park activated her communication device and listened to a brief report. It seems we have visitors, she said with a slight smile. A Veltar fleet has arrived in this system, probably hoping to retake this world. Would you like to watch? Despite himself, Hyan was curious to see how the humans would handle a major Veltar assault. Admiral Park led him to an observation deck where they could watch the battle through reinforced, transparent aluminum. What Hyan saw amazed and terrified him. The Veltar fleet was massive, at least 50 ships, including several dreadnoughts. It was the largest force the Dominion had assembled since the human conflict began. But as they approached the planet, they encountered something unexpected. The humans didn't just have ships defending the world. They had turned the entire star system into a weapons platform. Automated defense stations fired from asteroids that had been hollowed out and converted into fortresses. The planet's moons launched waves of fighters that moved with inhuman precision. Even space debris had been weaponized, turned into kinetic projectiles that struck Veltar ships with devastating force. How is this possible? Hyan whispered. 6 months ago, this was a dead world. Humans are very good at building things quickly when we're motivated, Admiral Park replied. And nothing motivates us like the threat of invasion. The battle was over in less than 4 hours. The Veltar fleet was either destroyed or captured with minimal human losses. But what disturbed Hyan most was how casually the humans treated their victory. They seemed to consider the destruction of a major Veltar force to be routine. Commander, Admiral Park said, I want you to send a message to your high command. Tell them that this was just one of dozens of human bases throughout the galaxy. Tell them that we're not just defending anymore. Hyan activated the communication system and sent his report to Dominion headquarters. As he did, he realized that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted completely. The Veltar had awakened something that was more dangerous than they could have imagined. 3 weeks later, the first reports began arriving from Veltar worlds throughout the Empire. Human fleets were appearing everywhere, attacking with tactics that seemed to anticipate every Veltar defensive strategy. But they weren't just attacking. They were studying, learning, and adapting to every form of resistance they encountered. Scout Jihoon, who had been captured during the pursuit of Admiral Miran's fleet, was brought to the detention facility to meet with Hyan. The young officer looked traumatized by his experiences. "Commander," Jihoon said, "I've been analyzing human military doctrine from their own educational materials. I think I understand why we can't defeat them." "Explain," Hyun ordered. "Sir, the humans have a concept they call total war. It means using every resource, every citizen, and every piece of technology in support of the war effort. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is that they consider this conflict to be a limited regional war." Hyun felt his remaining arm go numb. "Limited?" "Yes, sir. I've seen their military planning documents. They're currently using less than 30% of their total military capacity against us. The rest of their forces are still on Earth, preparing for what they call Phase 3 operations." The implications were staggering. If humanity was defeating the Veltar Empire while using less than a third of their strength, then the Dominion was facing an enemy that was essentially invincible. "There's more," Jihoon continued. "I've studied their historical records, and I've learned why they're so effective at warfare. They've never known peace, Commander. In their entire recorded history, there has never been a single day when some group of humans wasn't fighting some other group of humans. They've spent thousands of years perfecting the art of war." Hyun understood now why the Veltar had been so thoroughly defeated. They were facing a species that had evolved specifically for combat, that treated warfare as a natural state of being, and that actually enjoyed the challenge of fighting superior enemies. The final proof came when Intelligence Officer Taeyang was brought to the facility. He carried with him the most disturbing intelligence report in Veltar history. "Commander," Taeyang said, "I've been analyzing human communications intercepts, and I've discovered their long-term strategic goals." "What do they want?" Hyun asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Sir, they don't want to conquer the galaxy. They want to explore it. But they've concluded that the only way to safely explore space is to eliminate all potentially hostile alien civilizations first. Sir, they're planning to systematically defeat every advanced species in the galaxy." Hyun sat in stunned silence. Humanity wasn't just defending itself or seeking revenge against the Veltar. They were planning to remove all threats to their expansion by conquering everyone who might pose a danger to them in the future. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Based on their current rate of expansion and technological development, I estimate they could control the entire galaxy within 50 years. Sir, we created a monster." The final irony came when Admiral Park visited Hyun one last time. She carried a formal document that she placed on the table between them. "Commander Hyun," she said, "I have an offer from the Terran Council. The Veltar Dominion can end this war immediately by accepting these terms." Hyun read the document with growing amazement. The humans weren't demanding unconditional surrender or the destruction of Veltar civilization. They were offering peace terms that were actually reasonable. "You're offering to let us keep our core worlds?" he asked in disbelief. "Humanity isn't interested in ruling other species," Admiral Park explained. "We just want to make sure you never threaten us again. Accept these terms, and the